Namaste and welcome to Wednesday 10 p.m. show. And if it's Wednesday 10 p.m., then it's obviously Shri Vibhuti Jha. And we also have Pandit Satish Sharma with us, and we are here to discuss the pluses and minuses of the 7 years of the Modi era. You could rightfully call it era, because when it did begin, it was an epoch making, era changing kind of an event. So, how do you look at this, Vibhuti ji? I think you have an overview about this whole situation.
Yes, thank you. And the 7 year is a 7 years is a very interesting word in Western philosophy. It's popularly known as the 7 year itch. That refers to those who understand, they get it, that you begin to get tired of any relationship after 7 years. Mostly it refers to justification of infidelity by men towards women, because they say, "Saat saal ho gaye, there is a time for infidelity." But that's the point which I am trying to say. We are doing a very timely analysis of this one. And this is my favorite topic of conversation all the time. Because leadership, in our definition of things, in our work that we do, is all about two things. It's not about whipping somebody to get job done. It's not about oratory. It's not about charisma. It's not about winning war. It's not about a peace-loving anybody indulging in that. It's about two very important characteristics of leadership that we define it in our work. And what we say is that leadership is all about being a keeper and maker of the mood of the enterprise. That enterprise could be a corporate entity, it could be government, it could be country, it could be family. So each one of us plays the leadership role in our real life. So what happens is he is the maker and keeper of the mood of the enterprise. Now, what is this word mood? Why mood is important? Mood is everything. If you think about it seriously and dive deeper into that, mood falls into two categories: degenerative mood and generative moods. And the generative moods are what we call ambition, desire to do something, can-do attitude. It's possible. Come hell or high water, hum wo jeet ke rahenge, accomplish karenge. Those are the generative moods that the enterprise lives in. And the degenerative mood is all about lethargy, giving up. Kuch nahi hone wala. Phir wahi sham, phir wahi gam, phir wahi tanhai hai. Things like that, frustration, despair. So you are looking at a 7-year mark of Prime Minister Modi's reign in this scenario. And the second element of leadership is he or she is the architect of the future of the enterprise. This is where the narrative building rests. This is where the creation of the enterprise remains, of what our future is going to look like. On both these counts, and both these things we say that anybody can learn. Leadership is not a born idea. It's not an innate thing. Either you are born with charisma or you are not born with charisma. But leadership can be learned. So from that point of view, both these important things are playing a critical role in Prime Minister Modi's life. And we have to understand that when we give a conversation about that, it's not a criticism to cause him harm. It is a GPS course correction possibility. When you drive a car, we put in the destination. If you miss a road or if you get into a traffic jam, the GPS tells you, hey, move this way or move that way. So we are trying to be the GPS for Prime Minister Modi, because he may not see what I see, what you see, and what the rest of the population sees. It's not about that just because I said something, I'm against Modi. No. Hey, when was the last time we became anti-India because our team did not win? When did I become I'm no longer a Manchester United fan because we didn't do well this season. We didn't win any trophy. I have not abandoned being a Roger Federer fan. So you do not abandon what you like and what you are fond of, but you are into this. And what we are looking at, that in his assets and liabilities statement, which you very eloquently put it last week, but the 10 items that you found were his absolute achievements, right? starting from abrogation of 370. So knowing what I know now, if somebody had told that Modi will accomplish this in the first 7 years, which his opponents had challenged he will not do in 100 years, how do we rank that achievement? So what happens is that we see achievements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that you listed out, which is absolutely great. But there is also a very important thing about accomplishments. As my American boss used to tell me, you are as good as your last deal. What's next? So people have a tendency to forget or bypass, oh, तो वो तो आपने कर दिया, अब आगे क्या करना है? That's where the narrative building comes in. And that's where Prime Minister Modi needs help. And he needs help because he's not at the moment creating a new narrative for India, what he did then. Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, and accomplishments on all of these. Now is the time for him to jump seriously into the narrative building for the next 3 years. So that is critical for him to do that, because his opponents, using the phrase Sabka Vishwas, which has actually weakened the resolve of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Sabka Vishwas aap nahi jeet sakte kabhi bhi. It's something like history will tell you, the world will tell you, normal common sense will tell you, you cannot ever win everybody else, particularly in a system like democracy, where the opposition is designed to oppose you to make you fail. Therefore, it is a psychological element. And I think for him to be more successful, he has to begin to define the narrative of the next 3 years and what India will look like in the next 10 years. That's the narrative that he has to show. And narrative is function of action, is performance, pure performance. That's what is important to demonstrate. He has already established his performance credentials as a Karma Yogi. In 2014, when in New York, we had the first ever TV debate about, Kejriwal, opposition, and Modi, I had declared there that Prime Minister will win because he is a Karma Yogi. He doesn't believe in wishy-washy things. Yes, politics is politics. It has its own handicaps. Point of the matter is that narrative building is a function of performance and creating the hope and the ambition and positivity that people will say, yes, this will happen next. And that's the important part. I think, in my opinion, and I think I agreed with you in your morning tweet when you said that Sabka Vishwas has kind of diluted into a territory of unreality. You do not need to win, and you do not need to be liked by everybody. That's the first fundamental error that most leadership commits. कि हमें वो करना है जो मुझे सब अच्छे लगे, सभी मुझे पसंद करें. You have to know that not everybody will agree with you. And that's what you see. And I would put Prime Minister Modi in one sense. He must vehemently attack the politics of hate that his opposition has launched on him. It has been there since 2014, politics of hate. And in my narrative, if I were his advisor, I would begin to talk about this hateful politics. The destruction politics must end. And that's where the narrative building will start. And the last word I will say, he must, as a creation of positive narrative, must free the temples. That doesn't require a rocket science to do that. Doesn't require assembly of massive base to do that. It just requires a resolve and a statement. He does that, the country will be back into the mood of positivity and generative mood that he set out. So much so that people are saying that the real independence we achieved was in 2014. That is the cash he carries with him, and he should not waste it.
Right. So that's an excellent opening statement. Do we have the balance sheet? Can we display the balance sheet? Okay, so they're going to take a while to display the balance sheet. Pandit Ji, let's pick up at the point that Vibhuti Ji has left. And basically what we are saying that on the action points, The report card of Prime Minister Modi is excellent, outstanding, what have you. You can say it is brilliant. Removing Article 370, of course, that one act itself is something that took a lot of doing. And along with that, a lot of other actions, the triple talaq, the CAA, and of course, the CAA implementation got stalled a little bit, and a host of other things that he did earlier uh, in the first 5 years. So it is quite an action-packed thing, like GST and things. So in all these spheres, the actions that he took against Pakistan, and he completely demolished that nuclear blackmail narrative that Pakistan used to hound India with. All that done, I think the last 6 months appears to be some kind of a drift, and that drift has occurred because the civilizational narrative has not been touched. And we all know that anybody who has studied the history of India with any sincere purpose, he knows that unless you apply the civilizational correctives, then mere efficiency is not going to make you effective. What do you have to say?
Om Ji, Namaskar. What a wonderful opening statement, Vibhuti Ji. I was listening to it, and it
Thank
just
you.
set off dominoes after dominoes in my mind as to where we were going to be able to take this conversation. So, my compliments to you on that. Sanjay Ji, you're absolutely right. And I'm going to speak from the point of view of a consumer of the messaging which comes out of Bharat. And I'm a fairly well-informed consumer. We have the majority of the diaspora population and the non-Indian population who are consumers of what comes into the mainstream. People like myself, Vibhuti, we dig a little bit deeper and try and see what's underneath the mainstream, what are the currents. So we sometimes can see things which the majority of the population will not be able to perceive. And the opinion of the majority of the population, I think, is at the heart of this. You're completely correct in the changes that have been wrought in the short amount of time that has actually been available are phenomenal. Anybody who works in any consulting capacity in a small company, a company of a few hundred people, knows how hard it is to make cultural and civilizational change. And that's in a small country, a small company. With Bharat, we have a country which, in terms of demographics, in terms of scale, it's I think it's larger than all of the European nations put together. And the European nations, we've seen what's happening, even from a point of stability, of unbelievable wealth gathered in colonial times. Europe is fragmenting. Its coherence is now dissipating almost on a daily basis. Only 2 weeks ago, we had a conflict on the seas between ships from Britain and ships from one of the European countries. They almost came to blows on the high seas. And so that idea of one united Europe, one united Euro-Christian bloc is evaporating. And that's from a point of stability, strength, and control. With Bharat, we had Prime Minister Modi ji, who came in to a nation which was on the recovery path from 1400 years of trauma and of such diversity that there was no consensus, there was no capacity to use force, confronted with a constitution which was created by colonialists, a judiciary which was inherited by Bharatiya citizens from a colonialist power, and an administration which had been created to keep enslaved the majority population. This is not a small task to do. And so the very fact that so many of these things have been done, I think, is a testament in itself. What Vibhuti ji said about assessment, course correction, narrative building, I think that's where we are now seeing not so much blame or deficiency that can be laid at the Prime Minister's door. The way I read it, though, is that in order to build a global narrative, you have to have the support of a global machinery. And that is woefully, woefully inadequate. I can recall that we had a time when the Wembley gathering was being organized. When the Wembley gathering was being organized, everybody was speaking about Modi ji coming to Wembley. It was like a rock star welcome. When we saw Howdy Modi in Houston, again, ripples went out. And these are major, major narrative building exercises. In the last 6 months, we seem to have seen a drop in the capacity for the Prime Minister and the BJP to project that narrative out in the wider world. Fundamentally important, I think the Nazis were the first with Goebbels to establish the value of propaganda. And propaganda is narrative building. And they had a terrible mission. They had a horrific desire to dominate, and that required narrative building. That required a PR machine, and Goebbels created one of the most powerful PR machines the planet has ever seen. If you have a good message, a holistic message, then you need an even more powerful machine. Not only do you have to establish your narrative, you have to establish it against competitors. We haven't yet got that dimension up and running. I think the security of the nation is probably better than it ever has been. But in terms of security, the identity, the narrative, the story, that is weak. And I think that's where the next wave of attention is going to be needed. We're in Great Britain, a tiny little island tucked away on the side of Europe, the far remotest parts of Europe. And yet you can see the influence that the BBC, who we often joke is really an abbreviation for broadcasting British colonialism, is still such a powerful voice across the whole globe. I was so delighted to hear the news that we're going to have a Indian state broadcaster, which is going to be an international voice. That is so long overdue. It's so timely. I'm really looking forward to seeing what sort of content it produces. So yes, let's start the conversation and dig in a little bit deeper in terms of narratives and where we can build strength and where we can perhaps even get rid of weaknesses. It should be a wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to going into detail.
Okay, right. So let's take the laundry list. And I think Vibhuti Ji has the laundry list. So,
Yes, I have the laundry list.
I don't have, because the desk is still not provided me on the screen with the laundry
I just
list.
put it up on my computer here, so I'm all right.
So
I have all the 10 items. Yes, yeah.
Okay, so you have all the 10 items.
Yes.
Now, let us tick the list that we have on the plus side first, and then we go to the negative side, so that Pandit Ji has a full import of what we're going to discuss.
Wonderful.
But if you can do that quickly, please.
I will do that. So the 10 positive items which were listed by Sanjay Ji last week were neutralizing 370, excellent fight against Corona, GST implementation, thwarting China, twin surgical strikes against Pakistan, labor laws amendments, that changes that were brought about, CAA, farm laws, laws against triple talaq, and Ram Janmabhoomi Shilanyas. So I know that a lot of people are disappointed with him, Prime Minister Modi, right now. As I said in my opening statement, when your achievements are over, then you are always saying, oh, to ho gaya, aage kya? It happens. But think about it like this. You can see that in this 7th year of Prime Minister Modi, there are many people who are distractors, who are creating a divide. Watch out for that. For every single Modi supporter, I would say, don't get despondent and don't get carried away. कि उन्होंने ये नहीं किया, वो नहीं किया, ये नहीं किया, वो नहीं किया. I'll send you an article which I wrote soon after Prime Minister won the election in 2014, in which I detail the steps to be taken and what needs to be done. But if somebody had told us all, that Mr. Modi will accomplish these 10 items if you give him 2 terms, would we be happy with that? I think everybody will be happy with that. Everybody will be happy कि अरे भैया जो 100 साल में नहीं हो सकता है वो उन्होंने 4 साल में कर दिया, 5 साल में कर दिया, ये तो कमाल की बात हो गई. So let's not get distracted by the distractions of the process that is there. So knowing what we know now, that this man can accomplish things, you need to give him time as well. और सबकी अपनी अपनी list है. In my list, temple freedom is number one. I didn't even think about Article 370. Let me put it very frankly with you. I was thinking temple ko free kariye. Introduce the parakram-based culture rather than action-based culture. We all know that sports में, Olympic में, चाहे Commonwealth Games हो, Olympic Games हो, World Cup में, has anybody ever been given a medal because of considerations of affirmative action, Black Lives Matter or action? It's pure performance. You win a tournament by performing. And how do you perform? You create a culture of performance in which you learn, you train, you become coachable, and you practice, 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 and practice. That's what is important. I will definitely say that. There are certain times we say even winning by one goal is good enough to get you 3 points in EPL, right? Or whether you win by 10-0, even that gets you 3 points. The important part is winning. Sometimes winning is ugly. As the sportsmen always say, boy, that was a tough win. Oh, that was an ugly win. Because I played badly, I just managed to scrape through. But a win is a win. By one vote or one goal. That's what we have to remember. That there are significant wins on the Modi side, on the positive side. And I would say this very simply. I'll throw one line to all the audience, to everybody. If you had been told by Modi that he will do these things in the 5th, 6th, 7th year of his prime ministership, I would say everybody will be happy that he delivered what he promised. Think about it from the positive perspective. And that's important. Yes, I totally believe on one more thing. I'm not the believer in the concept after Nehru who. We have had Lal Bahadur Shastri. He was not only Lal, he was also Bahadur and he was a Shastri. We had Lal Bahadur Shastri. We had many more prime ministers have come and gone. But I do know one thing. This is a very interesting coincidence because yesterday I read somewhere that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had told that Ms. Modi's coming will be very bad omen for India or something like that. Incidentally, I wrote an article on that based on somebody told me in Hindu temple here when we were celebrating, Modi ji aaye hain, bahut buri cheezein hongi India mein bhi. Because all opposition will unite to defeat the rise of Hindus. Defeat him and the rise of Hindus. And I have last word I would make here. That aaj jo hai, Modi ji ne technology aur apne kaam se, he has opened our lips and unloosened our tongues. The lips were sealed and the tongues were tied for 70 years of abuse by Congress party. Kahan gaye thi hamare awaaz us waqt? Aaj hum गुस्से में बोल रहे हैं कि मोदी ये नहीं किया, मोदी ने ये नहीं किया. हम ये पूछ रहे हैं कि where were you all who are criticizing Modi today? You are his supporters, support him. Virat Kohli left the cricket team in Australia to come back and attend to his family. Do we love him any less? An Indian team won back with pride. So I am of the opinion that leadership is replaceable. Nothing is irreplaceable. So after Modi, somebody will come. It's a 1.3 billion people. I have umpteen faith in the people of India that somebody will rise. So let's kind of take that stock sincerely and very seriously. Let's not talk about after Modi what he failed. He hasn't failed.
That's not the point. I think you're digressing.
Okay.
We are only looking at the balance sheet.
Oh yeah, the balance sheet is fabulous. I don't even need to say. We already talked about it.
No,
I already
talked about the positives.
For Sharmaji's benefit.
No,
and Sharmaji's benefit, I read them out
as well. Please list out.
We'll come to the negatives. We'll come to the negatives. Yes. So we'll come to the negatives after Sharmaji has talked about positives. Mm-hmm. If you want me to repeat some, I'll repeat some.
No, I think let's take it the whole thing at the same time because you already made your opening statements. Please list out the negatives briefly, so that he can have an overview.
Negatives में है Sharmaji that the government backtracked on CAA. It's not implemented in its full potential or achievement that was there. There was a total failure of the government to tackle Shaheen Bagh farm protest and Hindu genocide in Bengal. There's a matter of great frustration, the government inaction, zero action on left-written textbooks, zero action on right to education reform, zero action on correcting narratives, increased minority appeasements, tendency to seek approval from enemies, changing approach on Hindutva, zero action on equal Hindu rights, and lastly,
And this is where your temple
failed
thing comes in.
information strategy. Yes, these are the negatives. And I have only one thing to say. Prime Minister Modi needs to establish a good communication team to carry the message forward. And in one of the programs, I had said maybe he should hire our team to do that work for him.
Well, we're going to be doing as much of that work as we can anyway, because it needs to be done. And I think one thing that we have certainly recognized is that the amount of energy that goes into pointing out systemic failures in the Bharatiya administration and government, that same energy we can invest in putting together our own messaging, our own ways of stopgaps filling. We can do that. And so people are doing it. It's really heartening to see how people are doing it. There is, you sparked off a couple of thoughts. One is that I look on all of those things that you've highlighted as deficiencies, as negatives, as work in progress. Civilizationally, I think each and every one of them is an impetus, an initiative which will bear fruit in due course. One thing that we have not yet managed to do is to develop a thick enough skin to be able to say that every single Hindu, Muslim, Christian citizen should be viewed with the same equality lens and legislation as everybody else. And that is something that can be easily established. The Uniform Civil Code, but not just the Uniform Civil Code, but adhering to international human rights declarations and legislation. That shouldn't be too difficult to be able to implement, and that would have a phenomenal knock-on effect. It would get rid of some of the problems that you've mentioned with regard to the discriminative manner in which Hindus are treated with regard to their places of education and worship. That's rank, clear, indisputable discrimination. And there is international legislation which could be leveraged to stand upon as we change the domestic legislation to correspond. So those sorts of issues are vital. I'm totally in agreement that the civilizational pulse of Bharat is not yet beating strongly, and it needs to be allowed to beat. It's almost, I feel it sometimes, as though there is a ligature, as though there is some sort of tourniquet on a blood vessel somewhere, preventing what only Bharat has, its own blood, its lifeblood, its message, its vision, all of those things, that's still restricted. And I think the tragedy is that there was a moment in time when that could have been released because the world was expecting it. After 60 years of pent-up pressure, when the first administration came in, it could have been released. And I think everybody, the opposition to it, were rocking back on their heels thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to happen. It didn't happen then for whatever reasons. It may be that it wasn't yet administratively possible to implement those changes. Making the law is one thing, but implementing it can often be something else. And so I'm still of the opinion that that is such a priority, to confidently be able to assert this is who we are, this is what our value system is, and it is of at least equal stature to every other worldview and every other civilization. If that was trumpeted confidently, I think overnight we would see so many of those who are enemies of the state take a step back and breathe in, and those who are completely committed to a Bharatiya civilization, they would suddenly acquire strength. They would acquire rejuvenative energy. They would have an infusion of Pran Shakti, and that would again start to move things forward. So I don't see any of those negatives as having been, shall we say, terminated. I think they're all work in progress, and work will be done to push them through. The one aspect which is of greatest concern for me, though, is that the ecosystem which supports the Bharatiya civilization is still handcuffed. We still have the mandirs in chains, and that is a classic colonialist trick. What you do is you use the resources of the native civilization against them. It's been done for so many millennia, certainly in every continent as far as the British were concerned, and it's still in place in Bharat. The thought I have is that there is a caveat and is a worry, is that before we can make these dramatic changes in Bharat, we need to have the capacity to fight the PR battle outside of Bharat. One thing we saw with 370, CAA, all of those, is that the backlash internationally was coordinated, it was skillful, and it was in volume. I think what has happened is that the enemy have realized how to work with this administration. They've now probed, they've got a sense of what their weaknesses are, they've got a sense of how they can push them back onto their heels and get them into the defensive, and they do it so well. That whole Shaheen Bagh scenario, the whole scenario with regard to the farmers' protests, both of those were fueled by international repercussions. And that is messaging, that is narrative. We've had many exchanges with the High Commission in the United Kingdom over the years, and continuously we are highlighting to them that they have a responsibility to articulate that message, and yet they don't. I don't know why it is. I don't know what it is about the Indian Foreign Service, but they are not strident enough. They're not confident enough to say, this is our position and we're entitled to it. And freedom of speech, freedom of belief, all of those things mean that we can articulate it. The spine almost doesn't seem to be there. And I think this is a part, this is an area where we have to explore a little bit deeper as to why that is. I can bring, and in a few moments, perhaps a little bit later on, I can show examples of how skillfully the narrative is built against us and how weakly we assemble our own narrative with very particular examples. I'm engaged literally at this very moment in high-level conversations with the BBC because we made allegations that they are anti-Hindu, anti-India in a manner which is biased and prejudiced and policy. And so a team was put together by BBC featuring their very senior most executives, and we presented records and evidence to them. And they have come back in classic BBC fashion with policy statements, editorial opportunities, etc., all of those things. And so we're now engaging with them, but we're going to really press them on the discrepancies in their narrative. In fact, if I can show you one right now, I can just, is that okay, Sanjay? Technically, can I just share a little screen?
You can share the screen.
Yeah.
You can share the screen.
So perhaps, can you see this?
Yes.
So this was one of the examples I gave to the Director General of the BBC, and we've had conversations about this, where if you look at the BBC's messaging, you have the word Hindu chant and murder in the same phrase. So we said, you're building a narrative, and the narrative is connecting those two words together. And they responded to us saying, no, we actually are fair, and we use the same process in every other reporting. Now, what I showed to them was the reporting to do with the Manchester suicide bomb incident in the United Kingdom. And what I showed, I said, okay, have a look at this scenario here. We have lots and lots of reporting, and the phrase Allahu Akbar was actually used during the attacks. But nowhere does it mention Islam. Nowhere does it mention murders. Nowhere in all of the reporting does it actually mention anything which will connect a religion with violence. And yet straight away, with the one that we had for that one incident, I think, where it was connected, that in that incident, somebody heard Jai Shri Ram, and they pieced this together. This is biased narrative building. And another thing, have a look at this as an example. I don't know whether you've heard yet, but 215 bodies have been found in the evangelical missionary schools in Canada. Now, all of these schools were actually run by Catholics or by Anglicans. And what they did is they took 150,000 children away from their native indigenous parents and families. at the age of 4 until the age of 18, and then they built a narrative into their thinking. But you can see in all of these articles, not one mentions Christian, not one mentions Catholic. It's all 200 bodies, mass graves at Canadian, Indian, etc. Again, this is managing the narrative. And this narrative is so well established, it's so much a part of the way in which anything India does is rebutted, is challenged, and is drowned out. We have to recognize that this is the reality before we can then work on how to challenge this. And these are horrific examples. And you can see that not only do they do it in detail, but they then amplify it right across the whole globe, crying editorial freedom of speech, etc., etc. So there is a clear bias. There is a clear narrative which is already in place against Bharat. There is a established world order which does not really benefit from seeing a strong Bharat. It doesn't benefit from seeing a Bharat which can articulate a point of view. It doesn't benefit from seeing a strong BJP or a strong Hindu presence. And that narrative is the real battleground. That narrative is going to be there every single time India makes any change. When UCC comes in, it's going to be interesting to see how the media in this country flip that as being anti every other minority. They won't talk equalities. They won't say, oh yes, this makes a level playing field. It will be persecution. We will see the phrase Hindutva everywhere. We will see all sorts of right-wing fascist messaging. And that is what happens. And this is what we have to now put into place if we are going to get, if we're going to take advantage of the incredible opportunity that Prime Minister Modi ji and the BJP have earned in the last 2 terms. That's the next step. We have to be able to narrative build.
Okay. Thank you for this excellent delineation of the issues, especially the issues that we need to move going forward. Vibhuti ji, Satish ji mentioned the Indian High Commission in London. And he also mentioned that somehow they're all always too diffident, and somehow they always seem to require a pat on the back or some kind of an approval from the other side. And the other side, largely, if you look at the US, it is largely the global left. I think you have mentioned in the past that same kind of a diffidence and same kind of that yearning for the approval from the other happens in the United States also. Do you see any change in the situation, or is it getting worse?
I did see this change happen ever since I see Mr. Dr. Jaishankar in place. In my opinion, he may not be the politician par excellence, as the saying goes, as one of the Democratic Party supporter had said, that Jaishankar is not a politician. He doesn't know. He's just a bureaucrat and a diplomat. And I said, if there is anybody who knows the pulse of diplomacy, everything else, it's Jaishankar ji. He has been in pivotal positions as well. So he doesn't need a briefing to make a point. He perhaps briefs others how to make the point. That said, we are still suffering from the vestige and the past of the non-aligned movement. हम किसी के मित्र नहीं हैं, हम सबके मित्र बने हैं. But people do not consider you as friend if you are not a friend to them. And I have a famous saying, I keep saying that friends help friends over the non-aligned. Let's put it very bluntly. The Indian Foreign Service, somewhere along the line, is understaffed. I mean, that is a known factor. They have talked about on a per capita basis, there are many smaller countries that have more people in their foreign service than we have. So our foreign service is truncated. I believe in the IS examination, every year 7 people are selected, or 8 or 10 or whatever it may be. India needs a bigger manpower. And we are suffering from the fatigue of non-aligned movement. This particularly in the narrative building, one of the biggest ones that I find we suffer from, that we don't have a war room mentality. And if you look at the action of our enemies today, you see the picture of a war room in which on the table all the coins and pyadas and soldiers are all spotted on, and you move them when you need to move them. In my opinion, we may have the wisdom and intellect, but we don't have a war room mentality. That's what I think is missing. It's not enough to know, it's also essential to do. And that's one element that we miss out on. The second element, which Pandit was talking about, is that we always tend to seek approval. Log kya kahenge? That's our bane. But think about it like this, does China give two hoots for all attacks on human rights violations on them? And we are the most peaceful country in the world. We are the most accepting belief system in the world. And we have to defend our Hinduism. That's something wrong in the way we are approaching it. Can't blame others. If we allow others to score goal against us, why are we blaming our goalkeeper? That's the point which I'm trying to make here, is that we have to tighten up. There is no way everything can be done by any one person, but we have to stop being apologetic for everything. And this apologetic thing comes in because we don't know much about ourselves. That's another interesting part. The job that people like you on Jaipur Dialogues are doing, they are virtually neutralized television channels. We are educating people here, and I'm proud to be part of that venture. We are deeply proud of the venture because we are bringing the harsh truths. The fact that our warriors are not known was because we did not know that 5 education ministers were not Hindus. And if I say they were Muslims, then I'm a bigoted one. Think about it. That's the kind of narrative which is dangerous, is that we have to contest that. And we have to, we have to stop looking at log kya kahenge. Logon ka kaam hai kehna, wo kahenge. That's the different story. Pakistan is still asking for proof and evidence against 2611. Think about it. This is for people of the country to think and respond. That they are still asking. So when your enemy is doing what it must to defeat you, I'll go back to my favorite statement. Are we doing what we must to defeat them? That's the important part. You got to get the possession of the ball to be able to play the game. If the ball is not you, you are always chasing the ball. That's the important part to understand from sports. At least from soccer. I have played soccer at a competitive level, so I can talk about it. And chasing the ball is very tiring. It's far more tiring than playing with the ball, because you keep passing to your player around the ground. My friends in India, I want to say something. Get to know yourself. Get to know ourselves. That's the only time narrative will change. Narrative doesn't change by dictation. Narrative changes by a collective action. What Shastriji showed you here was a brilliant exposition of how the narrative is built. India virus was so easy to call because they knew Indians will take 2 months to wake up to respond to that. You do that against somebody else, and they are up in arms against you. This is what I'm trying to say, that narrative building, the Foreign Service needs to be trained in the war room mentality, not the passive, just saying something to, just to please somebody. Log kya kahenge? That mentality, that is one thing which I am considering as the biggest negative of our narrative building, that it reflects in our leadership as well. Our narrative is reflected in our leadership. And, as much education people are getting from platforms like this, let me ask this question. What did you do last to make that difference? To make a difference? आपको मैं आह्वान दे रहा हूं आज, कुछ करिए, आगे बढ़िए, take a step forward, do something. We are here to guide, teach, and implore you to do something, but doing will come at your level. So, I'm all for it. This is the golden moment in India's life, in my opinion. Never seen such positivity about India everywhere in the world. People are afraid of us, by the way, if you don't understand that. People are actually afraid that these peaceful guys are going to rule the roost. Let's derail them. Let's make sure that we do not let them derail us. That's up to us.
Okay. Let's close this one-on-one with my last question to Pandit Satish Sharma ji.
Mhm.
Pandit ji, if you were to be in the saddle, suppose you were Modi, then what would you do in the next 3 years? What would be your priority? You would set the narrative right in order to amplify your messaging and in order to actually strengthen the narrative around the actions that you've taken, or you would just let things drift.
If I was given that immense responsibility and authority, there are two or three things I would do. Firstly, I would look at the narrative changes which will have an immediate international impact. And I'll give you a simple one that can be done. And in fact, anybody and everybody watching can participate in resetting this one. Vibhuti ji, you mentioned independence. Now, here is an example of how deeply we need to decondition our own accepted narratives. Independence is what happens with a child when a child grows up and the mother and father say, you are now independent, you are able to sustain yourself. Independence is not what happens when you get rid of a parasite, a tapeworm, which has been feeding off your life force, and then you get rid of it. You don't say, I am now independent. Right? And look at how cleverly that narrative was spun. For the best part of 300 years, Britain was dependent upon India when they could no longer feast on the flesh and lifeblood of India. They gave us independence as they left. So I would immediately say, right, we are no longer going to celebrate any more Independence Days. We're going to celebrate, I don't know, a Liberation Day, a Decolonization Day, a de-pesting day, or something along those lines. And everybody would be able to pick up those sorts of narratives. To get an idea of how important this is, just consider Britain exists because of layers and layers of narratives. Trooping the colour is building a narrative. All of the pomp and ceremony is a narrative. Celebrating a golden jubilee is setting a narrative. When you walk towards the House of Parliament, you see those things. It's setting a narrative. Not a moment goes by without a narrative being set. And if you consider it a little bit broader, clerics do nothing except narratives. They set narratives all the time. A missionary is doing nothing other than setting a narrative. And in all of those places, we're silent. What we need to do is to create the mechanisms, release the energy to be able to set our own narratives. So the first thing I would do is probably immediately, without any sense, is to introduce complete equality for the temples. That is the most important thing. Our community has funds, it has resources, it wants to invest in our traditional learning and indeed the repositories of so much wisdom. So much spiritual guidance and so much bonding, the coherence that we would get in that. I would do that first and foremost. Secondly, I would look at any narrative which denigrates us. It has no right or place to be in a nation where it's denigrating the indigenous voice of that civilization. And so anybody who is setting that sort of a narrative would be looked at in that perspective. I don't know whether you're aware, but the last person who was hanged in the United Kingdom was a man called Lord Haw. And he did nothing other than set a narrative on radio during the war. He was always demoralizing the British public and always escalating and heightening the value of what the Nazi Germans were doing, narrative setting. And he was hanged by Britain. He was the last person who was hanged for treason. Now imagine if you were to look at the other countries around the globe. There are some countries who have very draconian laws. You couldn't do this in Saudi. You couldn't do it in most of the Middle East. You couldn't do it in Russia. You couldn't do it in many other places. So having some sort of improvement in the manner in which news, information, and narrative is set, if it's false, then it should have some sort of criminal penalty attached to it. There's no loss in freedom of speech if what you're reporting is facts or what you're reporting is good quality opinion, op-eds. But when you're deliberately setting false narratives which can harm the people of a nation, that too needs to be addressed. So I think those are the two areas that I would really work on. One last thing I'd like to just say is that law is narrative setting. When a piece of legislation is passed, It is setting a narrative, and everybody follows that narrative because it becomes legislation. Just consider, there's that saying, ex oriente lux, ex occidente lex. From the east comes light, from the west comes law. This is a Latin expression which really highlights what we're facing. And if you think about it, a bunch of sitting in the House of Lords in 1871 set the narrative which created the caste environment, which created the Criminal Tribes Act. They were setting narratives. We need to master the act of setting narratives with law. And once that becomes habit, then I think so much else will move forward. And people everywhere are wanting Bharat to stand upon its own 2 feet. I speak with Africans, I speak with Native Americans, and each and every one of them are desperate to see India take its place as a recovering colonized nation, as opposed to a continuing deluded nation.
Excellent. Uh, and decolonized nation versus a deluded nation. I think that's the best way to sum it up. And we need to go from being deluded to being completely decolonized, especially the mental decolonization part. That's what the decolonization, real decolonization is. So at this point, I will move to the audience questions, and I would request everybody to please subscribe the channel, share the video, like the video, and also help us with your contributions, if you will. Questions?